The morning sun cast long shadows across Interstate 40 as Mike Donovan guided his 18-wheeler through the New Mexico desert. At 53, Mike had spent more than half his life behind the wheel, watching America roll by through his windshield. The cab of his 2008 Peterbilt was more home to him than his small apartment in Amarillo, Texas. The dashboard was adorned with small mementos collected over decades on the road: a miniature cowboy boot from his daughter Sarah, a St. Christopher medal his mother had given him before she passed, and a worn photograph of himself standing proudly next to his truck the day he'd bought it 15 years ago. Just another 200 miles to Albuquerque, he muttered to himself, adjusting the volume on the radio as George Strait's Amarillo by Morning filled the cab. Mike smiled at the coincidence. George Strait had always been his lighthouse during tough times, a musical companion through the loneliness of the open road, through his divorce 12 years ago, and through his daughter Sarah's difficult teenage years. Now, at 29, Sarah was the brightest spot in his life, though he didn't see her nearly as often as he wished. Her nursing career kept her busy in Austin, and his life on the road meant their visits were precious but infrequent. He glanced at the framed picture of Sarah and his 5-year-old grandson Ethan that was secured to the dashboard. The boy had his mother's eyes and Mike's stubborn chin. Last time Mike had visited, Ethan had insisted on climbing up into the cab, pretending to drive while making exaggerated engine noises. "I want to be a trucker like Grandpa when I grow up," he'd declared proudly. The memory warmed Mike's heart on this chilly October morning. The truck's engine made a subtle but concerning noise, a slight knocking that had been getting louder over the past few weeks. Mike had already spent more than he could afford on repairs that year, and his savings were stretched thin after helping Sarah with some unexpected medical bills for Ethan last winter. The boy had developed pneumonia, and while he had recovered fully, the financial strain had lingered. "Just hold together a little longer, old girl," he said, patting the dashboard affectionately. "We've got bills to pay." Mike's phone rang through the Bluetooth speaker. It was his dispatcher, Jerry, who'd been with the same small logistics company as Mike for nearly 20 years. Their relationship had evolved from purely professional to a genuine friendship over countless loads and thousands of miles. "Hey, Mike, how's the road treating you today?" Jerry's gruff voice had a warmth to it that few people outside the industry got to hear. "Can't complain. Should make the delivery in Albuquerque by evening if the traffic holds. Sky's clear, roads smooth enough." Mike deliberately avoided mentioning the engine's concerning sounds. Good. Listen, I've got another haul for you right after. Refrigerated goods heading to Houston. It's a long one, but the pay is decent. Not great, mind you. Rates are still down, but decent enough." Mike hesitated. He'd promised Sarah he'd try to be home for her birthday next week, but money was tight, especially with the truck repairs he knew were looming on the horizon. "I'll take it, Jerry. But I need to be back by next Thursday. It's Sarah's birthday, and I promised I'd make it this year. Missed the last two." "I'll see what I can do, Mike. You know how it is these days. Freight's down across the board. We gotta take what we can get. These big corporations are squeezing us little guys from every angle." Jerry paused, then added in a lower voice, "Between you and me, the boss is talking about selling to one of the national carriers. Nothing definite yet, but keep your options open if you know what I mean." The news hit Mike harder than he expected. Another independent operation swallowed up by the giants. "Thanks for the heads up. Let me know if you hear anything more concrete." "Will do. Stay safe out there, brother." After disconnecting, Mike sighed deeply. The industry had changed so dramatically since he'd started driving in the early 90s. Independent operators like him were getting squeezed from all sides: rising fuel costs, insurance premiums, and competition from the big companies with their corporate contracts and economies of scale. Most of his friends had already given up and signed on with the major carriers, trading their independence for stability. The thought of doing the same made his stomach churn. Mike rolled down the window slightly, letting the cool desert air fill his lungs. The landscape stretching out before him was breathtaking, the kind of view that had made him fall in love with this life all those years ago. Red rock formations rose dramatically against the clear blue sky, their shadows creating patterns that shifted with the movement of the sun. In the distance, the Sandia Mountains were beginning to emerge on the horizon, signaling his approach to Albuquerque. As the miles passed, Mike thought about the past few years. The pandemic had hit truckers hard. He'd kept working through it all, considered essential when the world shut down. The empty highways had been eerie at first, then peaceful, then lonely. Then came the supply chain issues, the inflation, the diesel prices that nearly broke him. Through it all, he'd managed to keep his independence and his truck on the road. He reached for his thermos and took a sip of the now lukewarm coffee. Sarah had given him the thermos last Christmas, insulated and emblazoned with "World's Best Grandpa." The coffee inside was strong and black, the way he'd always taken it. Some habits never changed, even as the world around him transformed beyond recognition. The knocking sound from the engine grew louder as he approached the outskirts of Albuquerque. The sprawling city was becoming visible in the distance, its buildings shimmering slightly in the heat rising from the asphalt. Come on," he whispered, as if the truck could hear his encouragement. "Just a few more miles." He glanced anxiously at the temperature gauge, which was climbing higher than normal but still below the danger zone. Mike reduced his speed slightly, hoping to ease the strain on the engine. The delivery wasn't due until 7 p.m., so he had some time to spare. It happened without warning. The warning light flashed on his dashboard, then another and another. The temperature gauge jumped into the red zone, and smoke began to billow from under the hood, at first a thin wisp, but quickly thickening. "No, no, no!" Mike shouted, carefully guiding the massive vehicle to the shoulder of the highway. His heart raced as he activated his hazard lights and began the emergency shutdown procedure that had been drilled into him through decades of experience. The smoke intensified, and Mike could see flames beginning to lick around the edges of the hood. He grabbed his logbook, wallet, and phone before yanking the emergency brake and scrambling out of the cab. The heat hit him immediately as he jumped down to the asphalt, backing away quickly. He barely had time to reach for his phone to call 911 before the flames erupted fully from the engine compartment, engulfing the front of his truck. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming the cab where he'd been sitting just moments before. Standing at a safe distance, Mike watched helplessly as the truck that represented his livelihood, his independence, and 30 years of memories became an inferno on the side of Interstate 40. Black smoke billowed into the clear New Mexico sky as other vehicles slowed to observe the spectacle, some drivers honking in solidarity or concern. In what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, fire trucks arrived, their sirens wailing and lights flashing against the backdrop of the burning Peterbilt. The firefighters worked efficiently to contain the blaze, but Mike already knew the truth. His truck was gone. And with it, the life he'd built for himself over 3 decades on America's highways. As the firefighters doused the last of the flames, leaving behind the steaming, charred skeleton of his once proud rig, Mike felt something break inside him. The St. Christopher medal, the photo of the day he bought the truck, Sarah's childhood artwork that he'd laminated and kept all these years, all gone. Irreplaceable mementos of a life spent on the move, reduced to ashes on an anonymous stretch of highway outside Albuquerque. A young firefighter approached him, helmet in hand. "Sir, are you the driver? Are you hurt?" Mike shook his head, unable to find words as he stared at the smoldering remains of his truck. The trailer had been spared the worst of the damage, but the cab, his home away from home, was destroyed beyond any hope of repair. "I've called for a tow truck," the firefighter continued, his voice gentle with understanding. "Is there someone we can contact for you?" Mike finally found his voice. "No," he said quietly. "There's no one to call. It's just me." 3 days later, Mike sat at a small table in a roadside motel outside Albuquerque, staring at his laptop screen. The room was sparse: beige walls, worn carpet, a bed with a floral comforter that had seen better days. Through the thin curtains, The neon sign of the motel cast an intermittent blue glow across the room. The insurance adjuster's email was open on his screen, but he'd read it so many times the words had lost their meaning, blurring into a single, devastating message. He was ruined. Due to the age of the vehicle and the nature of the damage, we've determined the claim value to be $12,300. Mike ran his hands through his thinning hair, the gray much more prominent than the brown these days. The remaining loan on the truck was $17,000, and that didn't even begin to cover what he'd need for a down payment on a replacement. His business was effectively over. He leaned back in the chair, which creaked under his weight. The past 72 hours had been a blur of phone calls, to the insurance company, to the bank that held his loan, to the client whose goods had been delayed, to Jerry, who had sounded genuinely heartbroken but couldn't offer any solutions. The refrigerated load to Houston had gone to another driver, another independent operator who still had a functioning truck. Outside his window, the constant flow of traffic on the interstate was a cruel reminder of the life that was continuing without him. Trucks rumbled by. Some of them probably owner-operators like him, others corporate fleets. All of them still moving, while he was stranded in this anonymous motel room with his dwindling savings and mounting despair. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dad, everything okay? You've been quiet." Mike's thumb hovered over the screen. He'd been avoiding this conversation. His daughter had enough on her plate with her nursing job and caring for Ethan. Her ex-husband was unreliable with child support, and she'd been picking up extra shifts to make ends meet. The last thing he wanted was to burden her with his problems. "All good, sweetheart. Just busy with paperwork. See you next week." The lie left a bitter taste in his mouth, but he sent it anyway. How could he tell her that he wouldn't make her birthday again? That the truck that had been a fixture of her childhood was gone? That her father, at 53, was facing the prospect of starting over with nothing? A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. It was Ray, a fellow trucker who'd been passing through and heard about Mike's situation through the industry grapevine. They'd met years ago at a truck stop in Oklahoma and had stayed loosely in touch, occasionally crossing paths on the highways of America. "Thought you could use this," Ray said, handing Mike a paper bag containing a warm meal from the diner across the street. The smell of pot roast and mashed potatoes filled the small room. "Thanks, man. You didn't have to." Mike stepped aside to let his colleague enter. "Hell, we've all been where you are, or close enough." Ray settled into the room's only chair, adjusting his worn trucker cap. In his late 60s, Ray had the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life under the sun, crisscrossed with lines that told stories of thousands of miles and countless sunrises viewed through a windshield. "Heard about your rig from Hank at the dispatch. Damn shame." Mike nodded, unwrapping the meal and realizing suddenly how hungry he was. He hadn't eaten properly since the fire. Engine fire, total loss. Been with that truck for 15 years. She was a beauty, Ray acknowledged. "What's the plan now?" Mike shook his head, swallowing a bite of food. "There is no plan. Insurance won't cover the loan. Credit's shot from keeping the old girl running these past few years. I'm 53, with no college degree, and one skill, driving truck." "You could sign on with one of the big companies," Ray suggested. "It's not the same as being your own boss, but it's something. They're always hiring, especially with your experience." "Maybe," Mike said without conviction. The thought of working for someone else after 30 years of independence felt like failure. He'd need to follow corporate routes, adhere to company policies, answer to supervisors who might have half his experience but twice his authority. The idea made him feel physically ill. They talked for another hour, Ray sharing news of mutual acquaintances and the state of the industry. Before leaving, he pressed a business card into Mike's hand. "Friend of mine runs hiring at Pacific Express. Tell him I sent you. He'll treat you fair." Ray paused at the door. "This ain't the end of the road, Mike. Just a detour." After Ray left, Mike found himself scrolling through photos on his phone. Pictures of his truck in better days, of Sarah when she was little riding in the cab, of Ethan's first visit to Grandpa's big truck, of the countless sunrises and sunsets he'd witnessed from behind that wheel. Each image was a knife twist of loss. The motel room seemed to close in around him, the walls of his temporary prison. Outside, the world continued its relentless pace. Trucks kept moving, goods kept flowing, the great American economy grinding forward while he sat marooned in this beige purgatory. On a whim, he opened Facebook and started typing. He wasn't one for social media usually. He checked in occasionally to see Sarah's posts about Ethan, or to keep up with a few old friends, but rarely posted himself. Tonight, though, he needed to say something, to put his feelings somewhere before they crushed him from within. After 30 years on the road, it ended today on the side of I-40. My old Peterbilt gave her last mile. Not sure what's next, but grateful for the journey and all the people I've met along the way. This old highway might have seen the last of Mike Donovan's rig, but I've got memories nobody can take away. He hesitated, then added a photo of himself standing beside his truck from happier times. A sunny day in Texas, both of them gleaming with pride. Mike's hair had been more brown than gray then, his face less lined, his future stretching out before him like an endless highway. He posted it before he could change his mind, then closed the laptop. The neon light from the motel sign continued to pulse through the curtains, casting the room in alternating darkness and electric blue. Mike lay back on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since he was a teenager, he had nowhere to be tomorrow, no schedule to keep, no miles to cover before sundown. Sleep evaded him as the night wore on. Around 3 a.m., he gave up and turned on the small TV, flipping aimlessly through channels until he found an old Western. The familiar rhythms of the genre, good men fighting for what's right, persevering against hardship, provided a small comfort as the night slowly gave way to dawn. The next morning, Mike was surprised to find his post had been shared hundreds of times within the trucking community. Comments poured in, stories from drivers who knew him, others who'd faced similar hardships, and words of encouragement from strangers who understood the bond between a trucker and his rig. Ray had shared it with several trucking groups, and the post had taken on a life of its own. There was something about Mike's simple words, the dignity in his loss, that had resonated with people across the country. Drivers from Maine to California, Florida to Washington offered solidarity, sharing their own stories of setbacks and comebacks on the road. Mike read through the comments with growing amazement. He'd never thought of himself as part of a community exactly. Trucking was largely a solitary profession, but here was evidence that he belonged to something larger than himself, a brotherhood and sisterhood of the highway. Among the notifications was a message from a name he didn't recognize. Mr. Donovan, my name is Lisa Keller. I work for George Strait's management team. We've come across your story and would like to speak with you. Could you please call me at this number? Mike stared at the message for a long time. It had to be a joke, some cruel prank at his expense. Why would George Strait's people care about an old trucker who lost his rig? Still, a quick Google search showed that Lisa Keller was indeed an employee of Keller Management, which represented several country music artists, including George Strait. With nothing to lose, he dialed the number, his heart pounding in his chest as the line rang. Keller Management, this is Lisa. Mike cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. This is Mike Donovan. I, got a message to call this number. Mr. Donovan, thank you for calling back. The woman's voice was warm and professional. Yes, I represent George Strait's management team, and we'd like to speak with you about your situation. Mike's hand tightened on the phone. If this is some kind of joke, no joke, Mr. Donovan, I assure you. Let me explain. Lisa's tone was patient and understanding, as if she were used to people not believing her. Mike listened in disbelief as Lisa explained that George Strait had recently partnered with a major truck manufacturer for a charity initiative supporting independent truckers facing hardship. The country star had a lifelong respect for the profession, influenced by his own father's summer work hauling livestock when George was a boy. His post had been brought to their attention by one of the trucking community groups involved in the project. Mr. Strait was particularly moved by your story and your decades of dedication to the industry, Lisa continued. He'd like to help. Help? How? Mike could barely process what he was hearing. He paced the small motel room, the phone pressed tightly to his ear. We'd like to fly you to San Antonio next week to meet with Mr. Strait and the team from the manufacturer. They're prepared to offer you a new truck as part of their program launch. Mike sat down heavily on the motel bed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lisa laughed gently. This isn't a joke, Mr. Donovan. We've already made arrangements. All you need to do is be in San Antonio next Tuesday. We'll cover your flight, accommodations, everything. Mike's mind raced. Next Tuesday was Sarah's birthday. I'm supposed to be in Austin next week for my daughter's birthday. She lives there with my grandson. That works out perfectly then. San Antonio is just an hour and a half from Austin. We can arrange transportation for you between the cities if needed. After ending the call, Mike sat motionless for a long time. It seemed impossible, the kind of thing that happened to other people, not to him. Yet the email confirmation that arrived moments later was real. The flight details, hotel reservation, and meeting schedule were all there in black and white. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. George Strait, the George Strait, whose music had been the soundtrack to Mike's life on the road, was going to meet him and give him a new truck. It was beyond anything he could have imagined when he'd posted that simple message to Facebook last night. He called Sarah immediately, his fingers trembling as he dialed. Dad, is everything okay? The concern in her voice was clear. She'd know something was wrong just from his silence over the past few days. Better than okay, sweetheart. You're not going to believe what just happened. He recounted the conversation with Lisa, his voice shaking with emotion. Oh my God, Dad, that's amazing. George Strait, you've been listening to him since before I was born. Sarah's excitement bubbled through the phone, and for a moment, Mike could picture her as a little girl again, bouncing on her toes with exhilaration. I know, it's crazy, but Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you. Mike took a deep breath, steadying himself. The truth is, I lost the truck. It caught fire outside Albuquerque 3 days ago. Total loss. Insurance won't cover the loan. I was going to have to tell you I couldn't make it for your birthday because I was broke and didn't know what I was going to do next. There was silence on the line. Mike could hear the faint sounds of a hospital in the background. Sarah must be at work. Why didn't you tell me? She finally asked, her voice soft. I didn't want to worry you. You've got your own life, your own struggles. I'm your dad. I'm supposed to be the one helping you, not the other way around. Dad, we're family. Your struggles are my struggles. Promise me you won't keep things from me again, no matter how bad they seem. I promise, Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. And it looks like I'll make your birthday after all, with quite a story to tell. After the call ended, Mike stepped outside the motel room into the bright New Mexico sunlight. For the first time in days, he felt something like hope. The weight on his shoulders hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had lightened enough for him to stand straighter, breathe deeper. He walked across the parking lot to a small diner adjacent to the motel, nodding to the waitress who had come to recognize him over the past few days. The place was a classic roadside establishment, vinyl booths, laminated menus, the smell of coffee and bacon lingering in the air. You're looking better today, she commented as she poured him a cup of coffee. Her name tag read Dolores, and her face showed the gentle lines of a life fully lived. Got some good news? Mike smiled, surprising himself with how natural it felt after days of despair. You could say that. Might be getting back on the road sooner than I thought. The days leading up to the San Antonio trip passed in a blur. News of Mike's story spread through the trucking community and beyond. Local news in Amarillo picked it up. Then a national trucking magazine called to interview him. By the time he boarded the flight to San Antonio, his first time on a plane in over a decade, Mike's simple Facebook post had been viewed by thousands. The flight was brief, but gave Mike a new perspective on the landscape he usually traversed at ground level. From 30,000 feet, the highways looked like ribbons laid gently across the earth, connecting communities in an intricate web. Those were his highways, his roads, the arteries of America that had been his home for 3 decades. As the plane began its descent into San Antonio, Mike gazed out the window at the sprawling Texas landscape below, the same roads he'd traveled countless times from the ground. For the first time in weeks, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: anticipation. Not just for what lay ahead with George Strait and the potential new truck, but for life itself. The chance to keep moving forward, to continue the journey he'd thought was over. The San Antonio Hotel was the fanciest place Mike had ever stayed. Located on the famous River Walk, the room featured a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, a spacious bathroom with marble countertops, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the picturesque waterway below. The evening lights of restaurants and shops reflected on the gentle current, creating a scene that felt more like a movie set than real life. Mike stood by the window for a long time, watching tourists and locals stroll along the riverside paths. Couples held hands, families laughed together, musicians played at outdoor cafes. The vibrant scene was a stark contrast to the isolated motel room where he'd spent the past week. On the desk was a gift basket waiting with Texas-themed treats: gourmet pecans, locally made salsa, artisanal beef jerky, and a bottle of premium Texas whiskey. The note attached read, "Looking forward to meeting you tomorrow, George Strait." Mike picked up the note with trembling hands. The country music legend had actually written his name. He carefully placed it back in the basket, treating it with the reverence of a historical artifact. He called Sarah to share the moment, holding up his phone to show her the luxurious room during a video call. "Dad, this is incredible!" she exclaimed, her face bright with excitement on the small screen. "Take pictures of everything. I can't believe you're meeting George Strait tomorrow." "I will, sweetheart. I still can't believe it's happening." Mike panned the camera around to show her the view of the river walk. "How's my little man doing?" Sarah shifted the phone to show Ethan playing with trucks on the living room floor. "He's been telling everyone at preschool that his grandpa is meeting a famous cowboy. His teacher thought he was making up stories until I explained." Mike laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that surprised him. "Tell him I'll bring him something special from San Antonio." After ending the call, Mike decided to explore the river walk. The evening air was pleasantly warm, carrying the aromas of Tex-Mex cuisine and the sounds of mariachi music. He walked slowly, savoring the atmosphere and the feeling of being a part of the world again after days of isolation in the motel room. He found a quiet restaurant with outdoor seating overlooking the water and ordered a steak dinner, his first real meal in a week that wasn't from a diner or delivered in a paper bag. As he ate, he watched boats glide by carrying tourists on evening cruises of the waterway. The guide's voice drifted up, sharing historical facts about San Antonio and its famous river walk. Back in his room, Mike laid out the clothes he'd bought for tomorrow's meeting: new jeans, a pressed button-up shirt, and a fresh pair of boots he'd splurged on in Albuquerque. After 3 decades in the casual comfort of a truck cab, the prospect of meeting a celebrity had prompted him to upgrade his usual attire. Sleep came easier than it had in days, though his dreams were filled with highways, burning trucks, and George Strait songs playing on an endless loop. The next morning, a sleek black SUV picked Mike up from the hotel. The driver, a friendly man named Tony, chatted with him during the drive to the event venue, a large truck dealership on the outskirts of the city that had been closed to the public for the day. "Been driving long?" Tony asked, making conversation as they navigated the morning traffic. 30 years, Mike replied, watching the city give way to suburbs and then to the more open landscape of the outskirts, though not for the past week or so. "That's a long time on the road. My uncle was a trucker, Chicago to New Orleans route, said he could drive it blindfolded by the end." Mike smiled. "You get to know the roads like old friends. Every bump, every curve, every stretch where the cops like to hide." As they pulled into the dealership, Mike's heart began to race. The venue had been transformed for the event. A row of brand new trucks gleamed in the morning sun, their chrome accents catching the light. Banners with the manufacturer's logo alongside George Strait's image hung from the building. A small gathering of people milled around near a stage set up in front of the main building. Lisa Keller greeted him as he stepped out of the SUV. In her early 40s, she had the polished appearance of someone used to working with high-profile clients. "Mr. Donovan, welcome. We're so glad you could make it." She led him toward a private room inside the dealership, giving him a brief overview of the day's schedule. "Mr. Strait would like to meet with you privately before the event. Then there's the official presentation, some photos for press, and a small reception afterward." Mike nodded, attempting to process the information while taking in the surroundings. The dealership's showroom had been cleared of most vehicles, replaced with elegant standing tables and a catering setup. "You're doing fine," Lisa reassured him, noticing his slightly overwhelmed expression. "Just be yourself. That's who George wanted to meet. The real Mike Donovan." She knocked on a door marked private and opened it. And there he was, George Strait himself, dressed in his signature starched jeans, button-up shirt, and cowboy hat, looking much the same as he had for decades, though with more silver in his hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of a life well lived. "Mike Donovan," George said, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." "The pleasure's all mine, Mr. Strait," Mike managed, shaking the legend's hand. "I've been listening to your music my whole career. Please call me George, and I hear that's quite a career. 30 years as an independent trucker. That's something to be proud of." The two men sat down in comfortable leather chairs, and to Mike's surprise, George seemed genuinely interested in hearing about his life on the road. They talked about the changes in the industry, the challenges of being independent, and the fellowship among truckers. "You know, my father was a math teacher, but he worked summers hauling livestock when I was growing up," George shared, leaning back in his chair. "I rode with him sometimes, learned a lot about life in those truck cabs. Those men and women keep this country running, and too often they're forgotten until something goes wrong." "That's the truth," Mike agreed, finding himself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. "Most people don't think about how everything they buy, everything they use, was on a truck at some point." "Exactly. When this partnership opportunity came up, I told them I wanted to do something real, not just put my name on some publicity stunt. I wanted to help people who've dedicated their lives to the road, like you have. People who've hit hard times but aren't ready to give up." Mike nodded, unexpectedly moved by the country star's sincerity. "I've got a 5-year-old grandson who says he wants to be a trucker like his grandpa. Even after everything that's happened, I'm still proud of that." George smiled. "Family's what it's all about in the end. Roads take us places, but family brings us home." He glanced at his watch. "Now let's go get you set up with your new rig. I think you're going to like it." Outside, the small crowd had grown to about 50 people. There were cameras from local news stations, representatives from the truck manufacturer, and several other truckers who, Mike would later learn, were also receiving assistance through the program, though in different forms: repairs, insurance support, or financial aid. The bright Texas sun illuminated the scene, gleaming off the polished trucks lined up in front of the stage. A large banner read, "Back on the Road, Supporting America's Independent Truckers," with both George Strait's signature and the truck manufacturer's logo beneath it. Mike stood to the side as George Strait addressed the gathering, explaining the initiative to support independent truckers and the importance of keeping this vital American profession strong. The country star spoke with the easy confidence of someone used to addressing crowds, but with a genuine passion that made every word feel authentic. "The highways of America are the lifeblood of our nation," George said, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd. "And the men and women who drive them, who spend days away from their families to ensure our stores are stocked, our businesses supplied, our lives comfortable. They deserve our respect and our support. That's what this program is all about." Then he called Mike forward. "I'd like to introduce you to Mike Donovan from Amarillo, Texas. Mike lost his truck recently after 30 years on the road. But today, he's getting back on that road with a brand new rig. Mike walked to the stage, feeling the eyes of the crowd and the cameras upon him. His legs felt slightly unsteady, but George's firm handshake and encouraging nod steadied him as he took his place beside the country star. At a signal from George, a large fabric cover was pulled back, revealing a gleaming new Peterbilt, top of the line, with a custom paint job that echoed the colors of Mike's old truck, but with modern styling. The chrome accents sparkled in the sunlight, and the massive vehicle seemed to embody power, freedom, and possibility. Everything the open road had always meant to Mike. On the door was Mike's name, and below it, the words, "Back on the road again," a nod to one of George's hit songs. The crowd applauded as Mike stared at the truck in disbelief. This wasn't just a replacement vehicle, it was a statement piece, a rolling monument to 30 years of dedication to an essential but often overlooked profession. George handed him a set of keys, the metal warm from the Texas sun. "She's all yours, Mike. No strings attached. Insurance is covered for the first year, too." Mike turned the keys over in his hand, feeling their weight. Not just the physical heft, but the significance of what they represented. A second chance, a new beginning, a future he'd thought was lost forever. "I don't know how to thank you," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. "You already have," George replied. 30 years keeping America moving. Now it's our turn to keep you moving." In front of the cameras and the small crowd, Mike did something he'd never expected to do in his life. He hugged George Strait, and the country star hugged him right back, a genuine embrace between two men who, despite their different paths, shared a deep respect for the values of hard work, perseverance, and dignity. The rest of the event passed in a blur for Mike. There were interviews with local media, conversations with representatives from the truck manufacturer about the features of his new vehicle, and interactions with other truckers sharing their own stories of hardship and resilience. Throughout it all, Mike found himself continually drawn back to the truck, his truck, gleaming in the Texas sunlight like a promise made manifest. During a quiet moment at the reception afterward, Mike found himself standing next to George again, both men holding plates of barbecue from the catering spread. "You know," George said thoughtfully, "my daddy used to say that a good truck is like a good horse. It'll take you where you need to go if you treat it right. I think he'd have appreciated what we're doing here today." Mike nodded, understanding the sentiment completely. "My father drove truck too. Never owned his own rig, worked for a company his whole life. But he loved it just the same. Used to tell me the highway was the only place he felt truly free." "Is that why you got into it?" "Partly," Mike admitted, "but also because it was what I knew, what I was good at. Never was much for school or sitting behind a desk. The road made sense to me in a way nothing else did." George smiled. "I understand that. Music was like that for me. The only thing that ever really made sense." He looked over at the gleaming truck. "You take care of that rig, Mike, and let it take care of you." "I will," Mike promised, the weight of the moment settling on him. "I can't thank you enough for this, for everything." "No need for thanks. Just pay it forward when you can. That's how we keep this country running, one act of kindness at a time." As the event wound down, Mike spent time with the manufacturer's representative, going through the features of his new truck, the advanced safety systems, the fuel-efficient engine, the comfortable sleeping compartment with amenities his old truck had never had. It was like stepping from the past into the future, a leap of 15 years in technology and comfort. Before leaving, George made a point of having a photo taken with Mike in front of the new truck. The country star signed it. "To Mike, keep the wheels turning. George Strait." "I had them make a copy for your daughter," George said, handing Mike a second signed photo. "Lisa mentioned it's her birthday soon." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Mike off guard. "Thank you. This will mean the world to her." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dealership lot, Mike climbed into his new truck for the first time. The cab was immaculate, the leather seats still smelling new, the dashboard a sophisticated array of digital displays and controls that would take time to master. He inserted the key and started the engine, which came to life with a powerful but surprisingly quiet rumble, nothing like the familiar roar of his old Peterbilt. Different, but not unwelcome. This was the beginning of a new chapter, not just a continuation of the old one. As he prepared to pull out of the lot, Lisa approached with final paperwork and information. All the documentation is here: registration, insurance, warranty details, everything's taken care of. She handed him a leather portfolio containing the papers. The dealership has arranged for the first scheduled maintenance as well, free of charge. I don't know what to say, Mike said, still overwhelmed by the day's events. Lisa smiled. You've already said plenty with 30 years of service on the road. This is just America saying thank you. She stepped back as he closed the door. Safe travels, Mr. Donovan. Mike guided the new truck out of the dealership lot, feeling the responsive handling and smooth power as he merged onto the highway toward Austin. As the miles began to pass, he found himself adjusting to the new vehicle, discovering its personality, beginning the process of making it his own. He turned on the radio, and in a moment that felt choreographed by fate itself, George Strait's "The Road Less Traveled" filled the cab. Mike smiled at the coincidence, or perhaps it wasn't coincidence at all, but a reminder of how unexpectedly life can change. The Texas landscape unfolded before him as dusk settled over the highway. In the growing darkness, the lights of his new truck illuminated the road ahead, casting a path forward into a future that, just a week ago, he couldn't have imagined. 1 week later, Mike pulled his new truck into the driveway of Sarah's small house in Austin. The modest 2-bedroom home was lovingly maintained, with potted plants on the front porch and a child's bicycle leaning against the steps. As soon as the massive vehicle came to a stop, the front door burst open. Sarah rushed out, her scrubs suggesting she'd just returned from a hospital shift. Behind her raced 5-year-old Ethan, his face alight with excitement. "Dad! Oh my God, it's beautiful!" Sarah exclaimed, staring up at the gleaming new Peterbilt. "Grandpa's truck is so big!" Ethan shouted, bouncing on his toes. "Can I ride in it? Can I? Please?" Mike climbed down from the cab, his movements more energetic than they'd been in years. He scooped his grandson up into a bear hug, the boy's laughter filling the evening air, before embracing his daughter. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he said, holding her tight. He could feel the slight tremor in her shoulders that told him she was fighting back tears. "I can't believe you're really here," she whispered. "And with this amazing truck. When you told me what happened, I was so worried about you." "I know. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Mike stepped back, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I brought you something." He handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was the framed photo of Mike standing next to George Strait in front of the new truck, both men smiling broadly. The country star had signed it. "To Sarah, your dad's a real highway hero. George Strait." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over the glass. "This is the best birthday present ever." She looked up at her father. "Better than the time you drove all night to bring me that puppy when I was 10. Mike laughed, remembering the small terrier that had slept in his lap for 600 miles. "That dog cost me a fortune in treats and cleaning supplies for the cab. And she was worth every penny," Sarah said, smiling through her tears. "Come on inside. I made your favorite pot roast with those potatoes you like." "Can I see inside the truck first? Please?" Ethan begged, pulling at Mike's hand. "Of course you can, buddy." Mike lifted his grandson into his arms. "Let's go check out Grandpa's new office." Ethan's eyes were wide with wonder as Mike showed him around the cab. The boy settled into the driver's seat, pretending to steer and making engine noises. "This is even better than your old truck, Grandpa." "It sure is," Mike agreed, watching his grandson with a full heart. "Maybe someday you'll have one of your own." "I'm gonna be a trucker just like you," Ethan declared with the certainty only a 5-year-old could muster. "And we can drive our trucks together." After showing Sarah the features of the new truck, the spacious sleeping area, the advanced navigation system, the improved fuel efficiency, they headed inside for dinner. The small house was warm and inviting, filled with photos of their family through the years. Several featured Mike with his truck at various stages of his career, a visual timeline of life on the road. Dinner was everything Mike had been missing during his week in the motel. Home-cooked food, family conversation, the simple joy of being with people who loved him. Ethan dominated the discussion, peppering Mike with questions about trucks, highways, and whether Grandpa had seen dinosaurs on his travels. After Ethan was tucked into bed with a story about a magical truck that could fly, Mike taking creative liberties with the truth, Mike and Sarah sat on her back porch, enjoying the mild Austin evening. Sarah handed him a beer from a local brewery. "So what happens now, Dad? Are you really going back on the road?" There was a hint of worry in her voice. Mike nodded, taking a sip of the beer. "I am. But things are going to be different. This whole experience has shown me what matters. I've already talked to Jerry about restructuring my routes to be home more often. The new truck is more efficient too, better fuel economy, lower maintenance costs. I can afford to take a little less work for more family time." "I'd like that," Sarah said softly. "Ethan would too. He idolizes his grandpa, the truck driver." "There's something else," Mike added, setting his beer down on the small patio table. "The publicity from all this has brought in some interesting offers. A trucking magazine wants me to write a monthly column about life on the road, and that charity initiative George is part of. They've asked me to be a spokesperson to help identify other truckers in need." "Dad, that's amazing." Sarah's face lit up with pride. "You'd be perfect for that. You know the industry inside and out, and you've always been good with words. We'll see. I'm not sure I'm cut out to be any kind of public speaker, but if it helps other drivers in situations like mine, I'm willing to give it a try." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the city and the closer symphony of crickets in Sarah's small backyard. "You know," Sarah said finally, "when you called and told me what happened to your truck, I was scared. Not just about the financial stuff, but about you. That truck was your life for so long. I was afraid you might give up," Mike finished for her. Sarah nodded. "You've always been the strongest person I know, but everyone has a breaking point." Mike reached over and took his daughter's hand. "I came close, I won't lie. Sitting in that motel room, watching my savings dwindle, not knowing what came next. Those were some dark days." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But you know what got me through? Even before George Strait and this miracle happened." "What?" "You and Ethan. Knowing I hadn't lost what really matters. The truck was my livelihood, but you two are my life." Sarah squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're our life too, Dad." The next morning, as Mike prepared to leave for his first haul with the new truck, a relatively short run to Houston that would bring him back through Austin in 3 days, Sarah and Ethan came out to see him off. The early morning light cast a golden glow over the scene, the dew still fresh on the grass. "Remember your promise," Sarah said as they walked to the truck. "Home for Sunday dinner every other week." "I'll be here," Mike assured her. "Try and stop me." As he climbed into the cab, Ethan called up to him. "Grandpa, can I ride with you someday when I'm bigger?" Mike smiled down at his grandson, seeing in the boy's eager face echoes of himself at that age, staring up at his own father's truck with the same wonder and admiration. "You bet, buddy. There's nothing like seeing America from up here." With a final wave, Mike pulled out onto the road. The new truck handled beautifully, responsive to his touch in a way his old Peterbilt had never been, even in its prime. The cab still smelled new, but he'd already begun the process of making it his own. A small St. Christopher medal hanging from the rearview mirror, a gift from Sarah, a new photo of Ethan secured to the dashboard, and a framed copy of the picture with George Strait mounted on the sleeper wall. As he merged onto the highway, he turned on the radio. George Strait's "The Road Less Traveled" was playing. Mike smiled at the coincidence. Or perhaps it wasn't coincidence at all, but a reminder of how unexpectedly life can change. The sun was rising ahead. painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Through his windshield, the open road stretched out before him, not just miles of asphalt, but a future he'd thought was lost, restored through an act of kindness that had changed everything. Traffic flowed around him as the city gave way to more open country. Another trucker passed in the opposite lanes, giving the traditional horn salute that had connected drivers for generations. Mike returned the gesture, feeling the deep sense of belonging that came with it. He was back where he belonged, part of the great mobile community that kept America moving, connected by highways, truck stops, and the shared experience of life on the road. The miles began to accumulate as the morning progressed. Mike settled into the familiar rhythm of driving, his body remembering the patterns even as it adjusted to the new environment of the modern cab. The advanced technology made some aspects easier. The improved suspension meant less fatigue. The navigation system eliminated the need for paper maps and guesswork. The quieter engine allowed him to listen to music at a lower volume. But the essence remained the same. The highway unfolding before him, the responsibility of guiding 80,000 pounds of machine with precision and care, the solitude that was both challenge and comfort. Some things never changed, even as everything around them transformed. As Houston appeared on the horizon, Mike thought about the journey that had brought him here. Not just the recent dramatic events, but the entire 3 decades that had shaped him. Every mile, every load, every sunrise and sunset viewed through a windshield had contributed to the man he was now. The loss of his old truck had seemed like an ending, but it had proven to be a beginning instead. A chance to reconsider what mattered, to reprioritize, to find a new balance between the road and home. His new role with the charity initiative would allow him to help others facing the challenges he'd overcome, to be a guide for those navigating their own difficult stretches of highway. And most importantly, he'd be more present for Sarah and Ethan, building relationships that couldn't be measured in miles or freight, but in moments and memories shared. Mike Donovan was back where he belonged, back on the road again. But this time, the road would lead him home more often, connecting rather than separating him from the people he loved. And that made all the difference in the world. As he approached his delivery destination, Mike keyed his radio to communicate with the warehouse. "This is Mike Donovan, approaching on schedule with delivery from Austin." "Copy that, Mike," came the response. "We've got a dock ready for you. Welcome back to the road." Mike smiled. "Good to be back," he said. "Good to be back."